Hello, this is issue number 5 of LACONIC, devoted to the theme of close-range photography. Its title, A Sensitive Breakthrough into the Space of the Other. Here is your playground. You stand beneath the metallic lace-like legs of the Eiffel Tower. Gigantic arches with feminine curves loom above you. You may walk through the base of the structure, contemplate the sky through the texture of its openwork framework. This space has been privatized and taken over by a crowd of yoga practitioners under the banner of a sportswear brand. Lowly is holding its Lowly White Tour. That morning, the space belongs to them and to you, the photographer who made the effort to come. Dozens of yogis, but no tourists, no security guards, no police officers. Incredible. Even today, I do not fully understand how such a situation was possible. In 2025, the forecourt of the Eiffel Tower is equipped with security structures, and at any time of the year, a crowd of visitors occupies the space, waiting for the vertiginous ascent. Climbing the icon, now itself a commodity, this architectural work that embodies the face of France. Let us take a brief detour and speak of technology for just a moment. A digital SLR is a fascinating technical object, an extraordinary feat of ingenuity. Consider high-speed flash synchronization. The narrow slit of the shutter sweeps across the sensor at high speed, while the flash emits not a single burst, but a synchronized barrage of light pulses that feed the opening as it travels in its fleeting course. It is a marvel, a technical tour de force, and yet there is infinitely more than that. Neither flash synchronization nor autofocus with 690 focus points existed at the time when Henri Cartier-Bresson produced his photographic masterpieces. And today, neither our ultra-sophisticated cameras nor drones grant us greater access to the creative power we perceive in the work of that master. On the other hand, if you truly consider your camera as a passport, almost a license, a magical instrument allowing you to accomplish extraordinary and meaningful things, then appropriating the forecourt of the Eiffel Tower as a playground becomes possible. And in truth, everything then becomes possible. Plate number 1. Smile and Dream. In this issue of LACONIC, I wish to present a rather ordinary photograph, uninteresting from a technical standpoint, too ordinary to be selected for publication, and this precisely in order to demonstrate that despite appearances, this image contains, in my view, an essential and invaluable lesson for the photographic approach that concerns us here. It is in fact the most important photograph of the series I produced on the day of the spring equinox, June 21st, 2015, beneath the Eiffel Tower, during a communication event organized by the brand Lowly, alias Logan, or Live Out Loud Every Day, is a Canadian sportswear brand associated with a women's wellness concept. I didn't know this brand. I had never heard of it. I have no connection or partnership with it. What interested me was the boldness of the event it proposed. I am aware that it may seem impudent, even presumptuous, to claim that a photograph deserves to be shown and discussed, not for its intrinsic quality, but on the pretext that it has a story. As often in life, what seems self-evident deserves to be reconsidered. While we usually think that an image is worth 1,000 words, I have observed that it gains enormously from analysis, observation, and symbolic and literary commentary. I now believe that image and text are remarkable partners, accomplices that associate and complement each other beautifully. The photograph in question has, at first glance, little to recommend it, aside from the radiant, luminous face of a young woman whose portrait it renders. Indeed, it is an almost banal photograph. The framing is uncertain, it contains nor is a planes nor context, and the lighting, though not bad, seems more a matter of chance than of technical intention. Its narrative potential is meager, and yet it belongs to a story that I could tell through a montage, a photographic plate composed of several images, for instance. That is what ought to be done: associate images to show the context, the practice of the yogis, a person in posture, and finally my portrait. I will present this plate shortly. And yet it is precisely this image that matters, because it is the one I went to fetch up close, at arm's length. Photographing the overall view of an event is not difficult. Photographing the group of yogis is not especially demanding either. Choosing one individual as a subject already requires more engagement. But going after a close-up portrait of a young woman at arm's length, that is the slightly mad charm of documentary photography. It is the extra step one must be willing to take in photographic Zen. You may know this Zen story, this koan. A monk climbs to the top of a 100-foot pole. He looks down at his master and questions him with his eyes. The master then calls out, "Go on, take one more step." And so it is. Our photographic practice invites us to slip into the unknown, to go beyond the accepted norm, beyond comfortable and inexpensive ordinariness. We aim for something other than a cheap gesture. We carry the photographic act through to the end. We live the photographic action fully, even if it is modest. And we risk the unknown zone. This is not about forcing oneself. It is not about doing something one does not feel. It is not about being intrusive or provoking unwanted interactions. It is not about behaving foolishly or rudely. It is about striving to bring one's photographic gesture to completion. Now, what lesson can be drawn from this photograph? The objective and realistic observation I derive from it is that at the time, I did not master the creative act of composition, nor the rules and techniques for designing a good photographic image. This is not a photographer's photograph, it is, in a way, a beginner's photograph. And yet, it possesses a precious quality. It is imbued with a creative approach that leads to good photographs. It is made of audacity and impertinence. And it is armed with this very asset that I produced my best images. I would like to conclude by saying this. We do not love a photograph because it is perfect. We do not love a photograph because it is sharp from 1 meter to infinity, because we placed the little tuft of grass or the 3 pebbles in the foreground slightly to the left, according to the rule of thirds. I wish to show that photography is deeper than flat, two-dimensional representation. It possesses many other registers: the dimension of memory, of lived experience, of the path taken and the effort it required, of the vibrations of the moment, of the interaction with the subject, of its symbolic character, and sometimes even of the unconscious material from which it draws. Plate number 2. Close-range photography with a short focal lens. Here a 28mm wide-angle lens sometimes produces the sensation of being projected into the image, making the viewer experience for the duration of contemplation a fleeting past instant that remains suspended, charged with emotion at full detonation. This is the kind of shock journalistic image that has sometimes become iconic of the 1950s and 1960s. I am particularly fond of this aesthetic, and it is what I sought to reproduce here in my photographs of the Hauts-de-Seine Boxing Championship in the Paris region. When I decided to cover this event, I knew in advance that I would delight in taking advantage of a stage accessory, the ropes of the ring. Indeed, they alone make it possible to produce no fewer than 4 effects. They create powerful vanishing lines that guide the eye through the image. Here we are caught in a veritable bundle of oblique rays, those of the foreground and background, like a firing range in which the projectiles are boxing gloves. Moreover, oblique lines are perceived as unstable and thus produce dynamism, the illusion of movement within a still image. Thirdly, they offer the opportunity of a frame within the frame. The mind is drawn to frames and considers them as micro-compositions. Here, the ropes produce 2 foreground frames, the boxers' faces and gloves above, and the footwork below. These graphic elements activate the desire to scrutinize the image in detail. Finally, and above all, the ring ropes are subject to the bokeh effect, that is, optical blur in the foreground, which clearly establishes depth. Blurred ropes in the foreground, the boxers in the midground, and in the background, the far ropes and the referee. We obtain an image that restores the full scope of the scene. A remark must also be made regarding the lighting of this spectacle. The ring is illuminated at its 4 corners by powerful spotlights without diffusers. This undiffused light is strong, direct, and harsh. In top-level wrestling or boxing matches, lighting is far more cinematic, producing a softened, constructed spectacle. Here, on the contrary, instead of aestheticizing boxing, the harsh lighting dramatizes it by accentuating contrasts, the relationship between shadow and light, the notions of light and darkness, good and evil, winner and loser are invoked and reinforced. Nuance and relative vision are diminished. Boxing becomes living drama, a theater of stakes in which everything is played: self-image, perceived value, the gaze of others, humiliation. It is one of the most romantic of scenes. Consequently, I find this lighting highly appropriate, as it renders the sincerity of regional-level practitioners who put values and dreams at stake rather than money or fame. This boxing reportage was a moment I greatly enjoyed. It nourished me for an evening with warrior values and heroic vibrations. If I amuse myself by bringing together the image of the young yogi and that of the boxer, I may draw the following commentary. Third-wave feminism, that of our present time, seeks to smooth over gender to level the essential masculine-feminine polarity. I have no firm opinion on that matter. I question it like everyone else. Social phenomena are but the expression of deeper archaic forces that operate inevitable transformations and paradigm shifts. Still, when I look at the boxer's photograph and that of the young yogi, I cannot help but think that whatever radical feminism may claim, and despite the vision it seeks to impose upon society, a fundamental polarity between the sexes persists. I find it clearly expressed in these images. On the one hand, combat, the real active affirmation in the world. On the other, an open, passive, almost languid pose, and a message written in black and white on the young woman's wrists, as if to say, "This is what flows in my veins," an indelible slogan of deep conviction expressing a very different objective. Smile and dream. Plate number 3. I consider this photograph to be one of my 5-star images. That is, one of my very good photographs. The criterion seems to me that a photo stands on its own. It can be presented by itself. It has sufficient strength, and believe me, this is not so common. It also reminds me why I took up photography and of the path I chose to follow, for its first quality is, evidently, its impertinence. In the early 2000s, I had a friend who was a graphic designer and photographer, always brimming with original and offbeat ideas. One day, during a photo session planned for one of my personal projects, I understood, simply by observation, the approach of the impertinent photographer who uses his camera body as a formidable tool of expression. His ambition was, at every moment, to stray from the beaten path, to renew the artist portrait session he was undertaking, to find new perspectives and unprecedented ideas. I delighted in watching him lie down on the ground to seek a unique angle, utterly unconcerned with the gaze of others, or rather, taking jubilant pleasure in transgressing conventional behavior and doing what the average person does not allow himself to do. The psychic framework of most people is thus limited, bound by acquired and unshakable social learning. It is probably this same conditioning that produces the immense denials of reality from which our contemporaries suffer. I received a certain shock from this, and it was a small revelation for me. There was something profoundly right in this approach. Practicing one's freedom, acting in one's own way rather than blindly repeating the way of everyone else. I understood that there was an artistic gesture there that spoke to me, an approach to creation made for me. To return to our carnival on the Champs-Élysées, I could very well have failed to obtain this photograph. To seize it, I had to climb higher than the top of the pole. Indeed, late that afternoon, I had already harvested 1,600 images and had just switched my file format from RAW to JPEG to free up some space on my nearly full storage medium. Thus, I made room for a few dozen additional photographs. I was walking back down the mythical avenue toward the Rond-Point des Champs-Élysées. I was keenly aware of the privilege of being there, in the midst of the tropical carnival parade, in a wonderful atmosphere, without even being questioned by the police. And by good fortune, I remembered the invaluable advice of the American photographer Steve Simon. When you think you have finished and covered your reportage, keep going a little longer. Do 25% more. In truth, I could not say whether I had not already been doing my extra 25% for 2 hours. After 6 hours of shooting, knocked out like a tennis man, I had to find the resources for one last effort to bend my knees once more and capture this photograph I love. It is one of my rare images for which I have only a JPEG file for the reasons explained above. But fortunately, my settings were correct and the photograph is also technically successful. Once again, it was an incredible moment, a flash of insight. What if I went to fetch that image one more time, I thought. And like the cherry on the cake, to conclude my working day, here is my best photograph of the day, offered to me. Once again, we have walked part of the way together. You are still here, and that is the sign that our minds are conversing, that we have found a common space. I therefore invite you to take part. I will read your remarks with great interest. And if you wish to follow this work, you may join LACONIC. Plate number 4. Plate number 4 shows people who are manifestly displeased by the eye of the camera. Their closed expressions and downturned mouths leave no doubt. Practicing close-range photography often provokes a disconcerting interaction, because the photographer's motive escapes the subject and manifests itself as an intrusive gesture, ethically questionable, yet valid because it produces meaning. There is here a subtle ambiguity and also a potential danger that photographers themselves must work to overcome. Photographing strangers up close introduces discomfort and doubt, as can be sensed in my photograph of the young Asian woman at the entrance of the Carrousel du Louvre, LACONIC, number 6. This approach must therefore be handled with circumspection and as much ethical awareness as possible, for the boundary between the bold photographer and the ordinary nuisance is thin. For my part, however, I do not believe in the approach that consists in explaining one's work at the moment of shooting. One must remember that at that moment, the photographer and the individual in transit through the street are literally on different and even opposing planets. It is worth recalling the powerful influence of the concrete context in which we evolve. A crowded suburban train after a day's work in the city profoundly conditions an individual's mental and emotional state. Anyone wishing to document such a situation would do well to take this into account for their own safety. Explanations of my artistic and philosophical motivations would here be out of place. I believe, on the contrary, that such considerations would provoke the greatest perplexity, sometimes even hatred, among passers-by or commuters, and would only generate further misunderstandings. Many people see no interest whatsoever in creating, especially in the street, and spontaneously, and regard with suspicion unconventional attitudes that escape them. To conclude, I would like to attempt to say what a sensitive breakthrough into the space of the other is. I believe this reflection is particularly relevant today, at a time of crisis in human connection that is only just beginning. In truth, I believe it to be a form of communication in its most direct and most authentic modality. It is contact, and our exhibitionist societies, which have abolished the private sphere as a suspicious zone, paradoxically display the greatest aversion to real contact, to exposure rather than the staging of an Instagrammable self. Our sick societies abhor the sensitive breakthrough that exposes us. Vulnerable, fallible, human, after all. They greatly prefer photography as a game, staging and simulacrum. For ordinary individuals, for beings with a psyche still rigid, immature, and loosened, who have such a need to be formatted and contained by authoritarian forms in order to know where to place their thought, how difficult reality is to face, how blinding and unbearable the light of authentic visions proves to be. Until next time, ciao!